Today, we're going to tackle a word you hear all the time, a word that's both an ancient hope and a modern headline: Zionism. Now, it's a term that can feel incredibly complex, really loaded. So, our goal here is to trace its story, all the way from a 2,500-year-old dream to the political movement that actually built a nation.
So what is Zionism really? Is it a religious dream that's thousands of years old, a political answer to European antisemitism, or a concept at the very heart of a modern-day conflict? Well, the fascinating thing is the answer to all of those is kinda yes. And untangling those different threads is exactly what we're going to do.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at an ancient dream that slammed into a new, dangerous world. Then, we'll see how a few key thinkers organized that dream into a real political movement. After that, we'll watch them lay the first bricks of a national home, and then see how a global catastrophe made that home feel like an absolute necessity. And finally, we'll land right in the present day to understand why Zionism is still such a powerful and contested idea.
All right, part one, an old dream, new dangers. See, to really get the birth of modern Zionism, you have to understand this collision course between a timeless spiritual hope and the violent reality of 19th century Europe.
So, what really lit the fuse for modern Zionism? Well, it wasn't just hope, it was a full-blown crisis. In the 1800s, nationalism was sweeping across Europe, and Jewish communities were more and more seen as outsiders. They faced legal discrimination, and especially in the Russian Empire, these brutal, organized mob attacks called pogroms. The old ways of surviving just weren't working anymore.
But here's the thing, the idea of returning to a specific homeland wasn't new. Not at all. It was a core part of Jewish identity for millennia. This quote from the Hebrew Bible, written over 2,500 years ago during the Babylonian exile, talks about this deep, painful longing for a place called Zion, another name for Jerusalem and the land of Israel.
And this wasn't just some dusty old memory. It was actively kept alive for centuries. From the start of the Jewish diaspora way back in the 6th century BCE, through the Roman destruction of the Second Temple, this hope of return was literally woven into daily life and prayers. For nearly 2,000 years, the Passover meal ended with the phrase, "next year in Jerusalem." The persecution of the 19th century didn't create this dream. It just gave it a new and desperate urgency. Okay, so you have this ancient longing colliding with a modern crisis. But how do you turn that feeling into an actual plan? Well, that brings us to part two, from idea to movement. This is where we see how a handful of thinkers turned all that hope into a global political force. The guy who really changed the game was a journalist named Theodor Herzl. Covering politics in Vienna, he came to this stunning conclusion. Antisemitism wasn't just a fringe prejudice. He believed it was a permanent part of European society. He argued that trying to blend in, to assimilate, was never going to work. The only solution, he wrote in his explosive 1896 book, The Jewish State, was for the Jewish people to have their own nation. And this was way more than just a book. In 1897, Herzl brought leaders together for the first Zionist Congress, and they made the goal official. This wasn't just about a spiritual return anymore. The mission was now political, to create a publicly recognized, legally secured home for the Jewish people, right back in their historic homeland, which was then part of Ottoman Palestine. But, and this is a really important point, Zionism was never one single idea. Right from the start, you had all these different, sometimes competing visions. You had the political Zionists, like Herzl, focused on getting international agreements. Then you had labor Zionists, who were dreaming of a new socialist society built through collective farms called kibbutzim. Religious Zionists saw the whole thing as fulfilling a divine prophecy. And cultural Zionists, they were focused on bringing back the Hebrew language and creating a whole new Jewish culture from the ground up. So, with these different ideas floating around, how did they start turning them into reality? That brings us to part three, building a national home. This is where the story shifts from conference rooms to the actual dirt of the land, as waves of immigration and big-time international politics start to change everything. The work had actually started even before Herzl's big meeting. The first major wave of immigration, or aliyah, kicked off in the 1880s, mostly as a direct response to the pogroms. A second wave brought young socialists who founded the first of those kibbutzim, and something pretty amazing happened on the cultural side. The Hebrew language, which had been mostly a language of prayer for centuries, was revived as a modern, spoken tongue. Then, in 1909, all of this energy led to the founding of Tel Aviv, the first modern all-Jewish city. Then came a massive game changer during World War I.
The British government, hoping to get Jewish support for the war, issued what's known as the Balfour Declaration. I mean, this was exactly the kind of high-level diplomatic win the political Zionists had been dreaming of. A major world power was now on the record supporting their goal.
So after World War I, Britain takes control of Palestine, and with that Balfour Declaration in their pocket, Zionist organizations really ramped up their efforts, organizing more immigration, buying up land. But of course, this progress had a direct and growing impact on the local Arab population. Seeing their own dreams of a nation being threatened, their opposition grew, and the conflict on the ground really started to heat up.
This rising tension, however, was about to be completely overshadowed by a global catastrophe that would change everything. And that brings us to Section 4, a state born from catastrophe. 6 million. It's a number it's almost impossible to truly wrap your head around. The systematic murder of 2/3 of Europe's Jews by Nazi Germany and its collaborators during the Holocaust fundamentally changed the world. And for the Zionist movement, it became the ultimate, most devastating argument for their cause.
You see, for Zionist leaders, the Holocaust was the horrifying, undeniable proof of their central argument, that for Jews, being stateless and powerless was a catastrophic vulnerability. A sovereign refuge, a place where Jews could control their own destiny and their own security, it was no longer just a political goal. It was now seen as an existential necessity for survival. After the war, a weakened Britain basically handed the whole problem over to the new United Nations, and in 1947, the UN came up with a dramatic plan: partition the land into 2 states, one Jewish and one Arab. The responses could not have been more different. The Zionist leadership accepted the plan. They saw it as the legal green light for their state. But the Arab leadership rejected it, completely opposing any plan to divide the territory. And so, on May 14, 1948, as the British mandate officially ended, David Ben-Gurion stood up and declared the independence of the State of Israel. Just like that, the primary political goal of the Zionist movement, to create a legally recognized Jewish state, was now a reality. But the story doesn't end there, not by a long shot, because achieving statehood wasn't an end. It was a whole new beginning. And that brings us to our final section, Zionism Today, a deeply contested idea. The next huge turning point came just 19 years later, in 1967. In the Six-Day War, Israel captured massive amounts of territory: the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. This radically redrew the map, and it ignited a whole new set of fiery debates about security, borders, Jewish settlements, and the military occupation of Palestinian territories, the very same debates that define the conflict today. And this really gets to the heart of why the word Zionism itself has become so polarized. For its supporters, it still means what it always has: the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, their right to self-determination. But for critics, the word is now inseparable from the results of that project: the displacement of Palestinians in 1948, the ongoing military occupation, and the wider conflict. Which leaves us with the central, unresolved question that drives so much of the debate both inside Israel and around the world today. The goal was to create a Jewish and democratic state, but what does that actually look like in practice? How do you balance those two identities, especially when you have a large non-Jewish minority population and control over occupied territories? There are no easy answers here, and it's in the struggle over that very question that the story of Zionism continues to be written.